So what we've got then is this little scene here. We've got one spotlight coming through here. I have enabled the barn doors on the spotlight, and to be able to see where they are, you go into panels, look through selected, you hit the T key, and that will show you these blue lines here, and you can narrow the spotlight to this little square area here. These will just move, you know, nicely. Okay. Now I have shadows turned off on this, so that when I look in here, the spotlight is determined entirely by the barn doors. So that square is just what the barn doors do. If I enable the shadows on here, and I'll just turn, well, I could put depth map shadows on. So that's going to give me the shadow of that window right there. So that's so these little grid lines are created by the shadow, and you can see that the extent of that spotlight is narrowed because the wall is casting a shadow. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to supplement this light, because we've just got direct illumination, and I want to illuminate just beyond where this spotlight goes. So I'm going to select, I'm going to create a directional light, and I'm going to constrain the directional light to the spotlight. So I'll select the spotlight first as the driver. I'll shift select the directional light as the driven, and I'll go to the animation tool set here and go to constrain point, and that's going to snap the directional light right up to the spotlight. And then I'll go to constrain orient, and that's going to line up the directional light so it faces in the same direction as the spotlight. So by doing that, it gives me a little supplemental illumination there. Okay, so I'm going to turn the shadows for the directional light off. Actually, it doesn't really matter because I don't have any light, you know, in this scene at all on the inside. So I'll create another light. I'll just create a point light here, and I'll put that on the inside, so that we can see now that the whole inside is illuminated. All right, so let's just adjust some of these things a little bit. I'm going to take the intensity of the point light, and I'm only adjusting this so that we can see the fog that I'm going to create. Because I want my spotlight to be sort of the dominant light. Okay. So I'm going to start off by turning the shadows off on the spotlight. And just use the barn doors because I want to show you how to texture map this thing. So I'm going to turn fog on. So fog is in the light effects section in the spotlight attribute editor, and you just click on that little checkerboard icon on the right, and that's going to automatically create that fog node. Okay, so, and it creates this light fog with the color and the density and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so to illuminate this, you can see what's happening here. It looks like the fog stops at the window, but that's not really what's happening. You can see that the fog has a finite cone. Okay, so just because the cone lines up with the window is pure coincidence. So what you can do is you can adjust the size of this cone again by hitting the T key. All right, so I'll select the spotlight, I'll hit the T key. Now when you hit it once, what it does is it gives you this this aim. So this is like the interest of the light. So you can change, you know, where the light is pointing without actually having to rotate it. Okay. Then up here next to the spotlight, you'll see this little blue clock-like thing, and that just will cycle you through the various attributes that you can control. The second one is the pivot point. So that little thing points to the rotation pivot of the spotlight, so you can move it over here or over there. So it works just like a regular object. You can just change where the spotlight's going to rotate. The third one is the cone angle, and that's that little cube right there. It'll change the cone angle of the spotlight. The fourth one is the penumbra angle, so that's going to give you a positive or a negative penumbra. Okay, and then the next one gives you these things called decay regions. Now the decay regions on one level, and the level that we're dealing with right now, they're just measurements. Okay, so this is giving you the light distance, 1, 2, 3, 6, 8. You know, so 0 is at the origin of the light, and then these are just measured distances. So the fog fills up that cone, and if you want to extend the fog, you can just grab one of these, the last little ring here, and pull it down. Okay, so I'm going to pull that down so that I now fill my room. And so that should cover, what I need it to cover. So there it is. Okay. So now my fog is now coming in. You can see that the extent of the fog, or the origin of the fog, starts right at my cone, and it continues right into my window. So I may not want that, but I can fix that later. The penumbra will also affect the fog here. So if I take my penumbra angle and I make that like a -10, I'm surprised that didn't affect the fog. Right here, this is it's coming in through here because my barn doors are wider than the window and I have shadows turned off. So it's just coming through there. All right, so if I go back in and change my barn doors, let's look through selected, and I change these barn doors and narrow them more like this, that should well, I don't know if that's working or not. But if I turn the shadows on, that'll definitely work. So let's turn these shadows on. Okay, and what's interesting about this is that the bars in the window are actually casting shadows into the volume of the fog. So that's a really nice effect right there. All right. So let's see if we can do that with just without casting shadows. So I'm going to select these guys here, and I'm going to put them on a layer and make that layer invisible. All right. So now we have nothing to cast shadows on, right? But if I take a texture, and this is what I did with Melissa, if I take a texture, and let's go into the hypershade window, and I'll take a grid texture. Yep.
What if you were to put something like a paint tree, you know what I mean, like paint tools, and put a tree in front of the light in front of the window? Would it still?
It would cast the shadows from the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a grid texture. We could talk about that. That's because that would be an instance where you would use something called a gobo. A gobo is it's a filter that sits in front of a theatrical light that creates sort of an artificial shadow. So you could actually take. Well, I'll show you. Let me just finish with this. Okay. So on my grid here, I'm gonna take the filler color, and I'm going to make that white, and the line color, I'm going to make that black, and I'm going to apply this as a color map to the spotlight. Okay, so there's the spotlight, and I'll just drag this grid over to the color attribute, and the light will be white, in the filler area, and it'll be black, or there won't be any light in the grid area. Okay. So let's see what we get with that. Okay, so that does pretty much the same thing without having to calculate those shadows. Now there's obviously a lot of adjustment that I could make in here, but this is kind of what I did with Melissa. Is we just took a fractal or a grid. Let's try a different texture in here. let's just take a fractal, and we can apply that to the light color instead. And remember, what's actually happening is this is a 2D texture. So what we're going to do is we're going to have light rays coming through the lighter part of this pattern, and we're going to have no light rays coming through the dark areas, and then we're going to have a variation in intensity in the gray areas of this. So with the fractal on there, then we're going to get those really sort of interesting random variations of light ray like that. So they're more like a God ray. So if you're looking for this sort of random God ray kind of things, and you're not really interested necessarily in replicating, the window crossbars, then you might want to use a fractal. If you're interested in replicating the window crossbars, then you might want to use a grid or something like that. So that's one thing that you can do. Now the other way that you can do this is you can put a texture on the fog itself. Right now what we're doing is we're putting a texture on the light and changing the way that it illuminates that fog. All right. So we'll break this connection here and leave that as a white light. So the next thing that we could do is actually texture the fog. So the spotlight has a node here called the Light Fog SE, and there it is. There's the volume material here, and then you can click on that downstream connection, and you have the color attribute of the fog right there. All right, so you can change the color. So let's just make this purple for now, and I wonder if this is going to illuminate very well. So there's that purple fog right there, okay? And I've taken the color map off of the spotlight. So now I am illuminating a purple fog with white light, okay? So let's change that back to white again. And the other place that you can add this fog, add color to this is with a texture. The fog is a volume, it's a 3D volume, so you have to use a 3D texture with it. So if I take a solid fractal, any one of the 3D textures will work. Some are better than others. I would think that like cloud or Brownian or solid fractal would work, and volume noise would work better than granite or leather, but you can always experiment with that. So here's the color. Let's take the solid fractal, we put it in the color, and so now we've got this smoky fog right there. Okay, so and what's nice is that this can be animated. I mean, if you take let me just set a project up here. Let's just say change this to fog or fob, and put this on the desktop and accept that. Okay, and so if I take this fog, it shows up, the fractal, the solid fractal shows up as this little icon here. So if I keyframe this, so it's the translate X, so I'll key that, and then at frame 24 I'll move it over to here and key that. Okay, so now my fog placement is translating over 24 frames, right? So let's change this here. We'll go to name.pound.extension, and let's go to 24 and do a batch render. This should only take a minute. Or two. This is the part in the video where I would edit out the silence, so it looks like I'm rendering like instantaneously. So we can open this with, IFF files will open with this thing called this program called fcheck. So you can browse for it, and fcheck is located in Autodesk under Maya. It's in the bin directory, which stands for binaries, and it should be right here. So it's just fcheck.exe. So we can just say open and say OK, and that will open the first frame right there. And then if you go to File, Open Animation, you just have to click on the first frame, and that'll bring up all the animations. So there's the moving fog. Now I did it way too fast, but if you want to have fog rolling in over a moor, you can just change the speed of the animation of that little texture placement icon, and that'll do that. So that's kind of a neat thing.
How could you do it like with the lights in that way?
With a twinkle?
Like with the lights having like certain things I got.
Not with this process. You could do it. I can talk about that in a little bit.
I was just curious. I mean, like I'm not planning on using it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that one a little bit, but
With noise space-time?
with what?
Noise, if you map noise to it, it's space-time.
Well, it might. I would think that you would use some. Well, I'm not sure. So, also then, let me just. I'll come back to that question. I'm going to turn this layer back on and make sure that I have shadows turned on this light. And so here's both effects. Here's the shadows being cast into the fog, and the texture map on the fog as well. Okay. So the next step in this is, well, actually, before I go to the next step, I'm going to look at this light fog here, and you have a density on the fog, and you also have in the light shaper here, you have a fog intensity right here. Okay, so you can change the intensity of the fog. Let's just look at this one here, and this is an intensity of 1, and this is an intensity of 2. Okay, so you can see the difference. Okay, let's go to an intensity of 5. Okay, so that's 5, that's 2, and that's 1. Okay, so you can change how intense that fog is going to appear. You also have, let's just change this back to 2, and you also have a density setting. So there's a density setting of 1. Let's go to 5. Okay, and that's going to make that fog more dense inside that volume. Okay, so sometimes they look pretty much the same, but there's subtle differences between the two. Okay, so it's a little easier to see if you don't have the texture map on there. So, but I want to talk a little bit about the intensity, because with a light, you know that you have a decay rate, right? And the decay will cause the light to diminish over distance. All right, so if I make this a linear decay, for example, and try to render it, I'm not going to see anything in here. The light, you can see there's intensity here up at the origin of the light, but by the time we get inside the window, there's almost no intensity because it's decaying over distance. And what's happening here is the fog is constant there, but it's being illuminated less. So the fog is actually living there, or it exists there, but the light is not strong enough over that distance to create it, or to illuminate it. So if we take the intensity of the light and we crank that up to like 10 or 20 or 50 or 1,000, depending on what the what our distances are, here's where we can really start to see, the fog, the extent of the fog is correct. I mean, the illumination of the fog is correct when it hits the floor, but it's just way, way bright, when it gets to here, when it starts out. So the answer to this is to use an intensity curve, a light intensity curve. And so right now, this is a linear intensity, which means that it starts off at an intensity of 1 or 10 right here, and then at half the distance it's half the intensity, and then at the full distance it's 0 intensity. Okay, so it's a linear reduction in intensity. But we don't necessarily want that. If we want to be able to change that, what we can do is create an intensity curve here. And then if I select this light and open up the graph editor, so let's go to the graph editor here. What that does is it gives us this curve. I'm going to hit the F key, F as in Frank, and that's going to show us this curve. This curve is a completely meaningless curve. All it is a Bezier curve that goes from 0 to 1 over a distance. So here's 0 and here's 1. This vertical axis is the intensity, and this horizontal axis is the distance. And it has just sort of arbitrarily chosen 100 as the distance. Okay, but this is a curve that is designed to be manipulated by you. It's not going to really do anything meaningful. So what we need to do is figure out what this distance is. So in order to figure out that distance, we're going to go back to the T key here and click on that little cycle thing, and we can actually measure our light distance. All right, so right here, we brought this last little curve down to 28. We can even call that, say, 30, just to make it right. So our light distance goes from 0 to 30. So now we know what we need to put this at right here. Okay, so each one of these points is defined based on the X and Y axis. So let's do this. I'm going to delete most of these curves, and I want to look then at not just the end number, but at the beginning number. Okay, so I don't really need fog to fill up this area right here. That's all outside the window, and I don't want it. I don't need it. So if I have my fog start at a distance of 10, and I'm just kind of guessing here, but I put that ring there, and that's about where the window is. So from 0 to 10, I want no fog, and then at 10, I want my fog to be at its maximum, and then I want it to decay over the next 20 units to 30. So here, this first vertex here represents my 0 distance. So up here in my stats, my distance right here is 0, and I want my intensity to be 0. Okay. Then my next keyframe, or my next vertex right here, this one I want to be at 10, which it already is, and I'm going to say that I want my intensity to be, say, 10. That's a guess. I don't know what I want it to be, but I'm going to hit the F key again. That'll bring this back into line. So basically what I'm saying is that at 0 I want no intensity, at 10 I want an intensity of 10, and then it's going to fall off until it gets to 30. Okay. Now, what this curve represents, though, is that my fog is gradually increasing from 0 to 10, and I don't want that. So I do have a curve controller here. So if I take this first vertex here and I click on this icon here, which represents step tangents, that will hold the value of my first point until it actually changes. So that's going to hold that 0 until I actually put another point in there. So that's called step tangency. So let's just see what I've got here. We can look at it this way. So you can see right here that that was successful. From 0 to 10, I've got no intensity. And then right here at the 10, that starts off with an intensity of 10. And then if I look inside here, my fog comes in, and from 10 down to the floor, it goes all the way down to 0. So I can tweak that a little bit. Let's do that. Let's take another measurement here. And in this case, I'm going to start the fog maybe at 12. Let's see what 12 does for me. So instead of 10, I'll make that 12. Okay, and then instead of a 10 intensity, I'm going to make that like 6. Okay, and then at 30, I don't want it to be completely gone by the time it hits the floor. So maybe at 30, I'll make it, say, 4. So now what's going to happen is my fog is going to go from 6 down to 4. So I'm controlling the fall off there, but it's still not going to start until I hit 12. So that's a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to take the color. That's the spotlight. I'm going to just take that fractal off of the color so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. So that's kind of what we're getting there. Now I have the shadows on the fog. I'm not really sure why it's not respecting this this square right here, because I have barn doors on it and I have shadows on it. So that's kind of a weird thing that I'm not really sure what's going on. So let's try instead of 12, let's try like 14. Just to see what that does. Yeah, so now I'm starting to see the little edge there, so that's a little bit too much. So let's put that back to 12. Is that clear? You guys kind of get what I'm doing right there? Okay, so the other thing that we can do is, right now what's happening here is the light is illuminating the fog, and it looks like the fog is decaying, but the fog isn't decaying, it's just the light that's hitting it. So what we can do is we can put an intensity curve on the light fog itself, so we can decay decay the intensity of the fog itself. And in order to do that, we have to do a little bit of funky stuff in the hypershade window. So let's look at our lights, and here's our spotlight. So let's look at the inputs and outputs. So this is what our fog looks like right here. Okay, we have this is what our light looks like. This is the intensity curve right here. This is the light info node. So this is the measurement of the light, and so this is what measures the distance of the light, and that feeds into this intensity curve. It becomes one of the axes, and then that intensity curve then feeds back into the intensity of that light. So if I take this, let's look at the inputs and outputs. I thought that, oh, here's the cone shape. Okay, so what we want to do then is we want to take this intensity curve, with this light info node, and we want to duplicate it. So what's happening, well, let me just duplicate it again. Let's go to edit, duplicate with its connections to the network, okay? So now I have to find it in here in the, let's look at the downstream connections of this. That should do it. Okay. So what I've got here is the light info node becomes like the main piece of this. This is measuring the distance. It takes that measurement and feeds one intensity curve, which feeds back into the spotlight shape. And then it takes another one here, and this one's just hanging out doing nothing. So I can take this intensity curve and apply it to my fog. It already takes the distance into consideration. So let's just take the fog here. And we'll look at the fog intensity. I went the wrong way. So there's the fog intensity. So what I can do is take this intensity curve and just drop it onto the fog intensity. Now that's going to give me way too much, okay? Because that intensity curve starts at like 10 and then goes down to 6. So then I would need to double click on this. I can open up the graph editor, and I can take this intensity and change it. So instead of going from 6 to 4, I can make it go from 2 to 0 or something like that. And so now I have a separate intensity curve on the light and another separate intensity curve on the fog, so they're separated. So that's the fog. That's everything I know about volumetric fog in Maya. Okay, does that answer your questions? Does that help? Is that
Yes.
good for what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Main globos is just the active attaching when you attach the fractal to the light intensity. Right. Globos.
Oh, gobos.
Gobos.
Gobos. Yeah, actually, what you can do with a gobo is do you want me to save this? I'll save this scene. I'll call this fog. You guys can have this. Okay, and I'm going to just open up another scene. And so, yeah, what you were saying was absolutely correct. I'm going to just create a plane here and scale it up. Okay, so this is the side of a house. Okay, I'll create a spotlight and I'll look through it. And I'll come down here on here like that, so I should be illuminating that plane. Okay, and I'll create a directional light, and I'm going to do the same. Select the spotlight first, shift select the directional light, and go to animation, constrain point, and constrain orient, and that will give me 2 lights on there. Okay, and then I'm going to just get an image here. So I'll just look at this one. Looks pretty good. I'll take this one and I'll save this in my fog source images. Okay, And I'm going to just modify this in Photoshop just a little bit. I'm not going to take a lot of time to do it, but I'm spoiled, you know. On my computer, I have an SSD drive, and these things just pop open, you know.
Not here.
What?
I said not here.
Not here. All right, so I'll open that up. La-da-dee. All right, so I'm going to just crop this. What am I looking for? Crop. And I want this to be 1024. Where's the height? All right, I don't know. So I'm just gonna, you know, create this little tree here. And so I'm going to save this. Tree 1. And then I'm going to blur it. Why can I not blur this? There we go. And I'll save this one. Tree 2. Okay. So then in Maya, I'll just select the spotlight again, and for the color, you know, I could drag from the hypershade, but in this case I'm just going to go to the little file node icon there. I'll create a file texture, and I'm going to take tree 1 and put that on there for the color of that spotlight. And now I should see, so there's that tree, and so it's upside down, you know, so here's where I need to go into the hypershade window, and oh, that's the directional light. So I'll just take this placement node here and I'll rotate that frame 180 degrees. So now I've got a shadow of a tree, you know, on a wall. So, and then I can replace that tree shadow with the blurry one. So that makes for really good exterior walls and things like that. You know, if you've got shrubbery, you don't really want to be casting shadows like that. So you can certainly do this. I mean, if you had a Paint Effects, I don't know. I think you have to convert Paint Effects to polygons if you're rendering them in Mental Ray, and if you want to have ray trace shadows, I think that the Paint Effects get calculated before the shadows. So that might be a little bit of an issue. It also might take a lot of calculation time. So this is a pretty good workaround, you know, if you do something like this. So that's the idea of a go-go. You can also use There's my rose window. So let's take this spotlight then, and I got the file already on there, so let's just replace that with rose window. And you know, you've got black around there, so that's not going to give you any it's not going to give you any illumination, and the rest will be like that. I've lost my train of thought. The reason that's showing up gray is because I have that directional light on there as well, right? So if I turn that directional light off, I'll get that. So that projects it, you know, pretty nicely. I could, let's actually take this spotlight and I'll look through it. And let's take the cone angle down. So that'll give me that nice stained glass window. So I think also, let's see if we can take, I just want to try something here. I'm going to select this spotlight and I'm going to open up the connection editor. And I'm going to take the shader for the so actually I'm going to just take a Lambert material and I'll assign it to this. Okay, let's make this white. Okay, so yeah, so that's cool. And so I'm going to take this shader and I'll put this over on the driven area of the connection editor. So let's go into the light data section here. It has to be the shape node of the spotlight. So this is actually the transform node. So it has to be the shape node. So again, let's open up the hypershade here, and I believe that I can get this from selecting it like this. There's the shape. So I'll select that and then click on reload left. So that's the shape node right there. Within the shape node, I should have something called light data. You can see it's grayed out, but if I open that up, I have a light intensity section. So I'm going to take the light intensity here and I'm going to map that to the incandescence of that Lambert. And that's going to give me that brightness right there. Okay, so if I disconnect it, I'm going to get that. So that's a way of like you could create a stained glass window with light coming through it, you know, and then you would take that projection and put it on the floor. You can also take the let's see, the shader that we have, the light shader. This file right here. This file should have, in the effects section, it has a filter. So if you take the filter and you crank that up, that should blur that a little bit. And then if you take the filter offset and you crank that up just a tiny bit, like 0.01, that should blur that pretty substantially. Okay, so if you're shining light through a window and you want it to get blurred, you can either blur it, you know, before you use it in Photoshop, or you can blur it by setting that filter offset. Let's see what 0.1 does. Yeah, so that gives you a lot of blur right there. So if you're casting a light through a window onto a floor in a church, you know, you might want to use something like that. So. All right, I'm done. We good? Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.